I am not going to be asking the panelists any particular questions. This is set up for you to bring up questions for anyone of the panelists based on their presentations or something else that might have come to your mind after hearing all of our fine panelists speak today. So I will open it up for the floor, and I will come to you with a microphone to get your question. And just please say, direct your question to whomever it is that you have it for.
Okay, I'd like to ask a question to Mr. David Gilbert. Okay. How does having professional sports team help in attracting tournament and events? Do professional teams actively participate in this airport? What kind of business relationship between Cleveland Sports Commission and professional sports team?
The answer is it sort of depends. So one, I guess I'll in reverse order. So our three main professional sports teams, they're all very active in our organizations. The presidents of each of the teams sit on our board, and two of the three are on our executive committee and very, very active. Can you all hear me okay? There we go. So very supportive of what we do. I think where we interact the most with the teams is in two areas. One, when there are events that they are directly involved in. So when, example, 2 years ago, we hosted the NBA All-Star Game in Cleveland. And it was a partnership between our organization and the Cleveland Cavaliers, our NBA team. Okay. And we were actually the entity that signed the contract with the NBA, but it really was a very much a joint partnership between the organizations. So when there are events that for which they need to be directly involved, they're involved. The other thing is they also control the facilities in which they play. So our NBA team in particular, we end up hosting probably on average 2 major events in the arena every year, and they're the ones who rent us the arena or provide the arena. That said, a majority of the events that we host really don't involve the team, our professional teams at all. They're events that we will utilize our convention center, other sports facilities, not related to the teams. So they're very involved, very supportive, but most events that we host, they aren't necessarily involved in. The last thing I'll say is they also are just great civic partners. In all of the cases, they want to see Cleveland do better. They obviously are very much part of the sports landscape. So in that regard, they've also been big financial supporters of our organization.
I think I could add from the professional team's perspective of how we collaborate with sports commissions. Many might think that having a large sporting events could be a conflict or competitions to our existing events. Many sports organizations don't see it that way because there are some crossovers of benefits that we gain from having these large events in town. I'll give you an example as we share stadiums for a lot of these large sporting events. So we play 10 games at Lucas Oil Stadium, which is the 65,000 seat stadium that hosts many international events there. Now, there are food and beverage services that we provide, the partners that we work with, that services the stadium throughout the year. What we do is we share cost across. So when we have more events in the stadium, it's less cost for us because we're sharing that cost across multiple events. So that's benefit for us. The other element is part of the product that we sell is a suite. And when we sell suites, usually those suite owners have access to all of the events that takes place in the stadium. We sell the suite, not the stadium. And when we have more events, that means the value of the suite goes much higher because they see that it's not just NFL games, but now they're getting NBA All-Star. They're getting Big Ten championship football games. They're getting Olympic swim trial as part of their tickets that they already purchased. So again, there are other ancillary benefits that they're able to gain. And for us, it's about the scale of economy where having more events helps us reduce costs from some of the operations.
All right, do we have another question or two from the audience?
네, 한국 스포츠과학원의 김상훈입니다. 네, 저는 험프리 교수님께, 프로페서 험프리, 그 스포츠 이벤트의 지역 경제의 효과에 대해 영향에 대해서 굉장히 네거티브하게 보신 부분이 인상적이었습니다. 그래서 예를 들어서 이게 그 네거티브 익스터널리티 외부성인데. 저는 소셜 코스트하고 소셜 베네핏을 전체적인 차원에서 비교를 해봐야 되지 않는가라는 생각이 먼저 들었고요. 예를 들면 스포츠 이벤트를 하면 주택의 가격이 올라간다. 이거는 조금 과도한 가정이 아닌가라는 생각입니다. 물론 이렇게 에비던스 베이스에서 이제 말씀을 주셨고, 또 하나는 스포츠 이벤트를 하면 에어 폴루션, 대기 오염이 심각해진다라는 부분에는 일정 부분 이제 동의가 됩니다. 그런데 예를 들면 대기 오염의 주 원인은 그 산업 섹터입니다. 가장 큰 거는 산업 영역이고 산업 활동이고, 두 번째는 트랜스포테이션이에요. 교통입니다. 근데 예를 들어서 스포츠 이벤트가 지역에 있는 프로 축구팀이 일주일에 5만 명 경기장에 한 번에 5만 명이 이동하기 때문에 거기에 환경적인 부담은 크긴 하지만 일주일에 한 번 하고 대부분 어웨이를 가고, 그 다음에 홈 경기는 만약에 연간 20회 정도를 한다고 했을 때 이게 과연 예를 들면 산업이나 트랜스포테이션에서 생기는 대기 오염의 문제보다 더 심각한 것인가 라는 부분에서 조금 과도하게 네거티브하게 보시는 게 아닌가라는 생각입니다. 의견을 한번 여쭤보고 싶습니다.
Thanks for your comments very much. So I certainly discussed some of the negative aspects of sport. I certainly didn't mean to, didn't imply, I don't think I implied that the negatives outweigh the positives. I have myself not ever undertaken such a cost-benefit analysis. And I don't know how it would come out. I suspect it would be positive, depending on how we're going to measure the benefits. In terms of the research on pollution, that research focuses on emissions from vehicles traveling to and from games in the United States, where there is almost no public transportation access to professional sporting events. The stadiums and arenas in the United States are surrounded by parking lots, and there is a huge amount of car traffic going to and from that. And the research that I am aware of from the United States links vehicle miles traveled by cars to air pollution, and in many cases, travel to and from specifically sports venues. So I don't dispute that that industrial pollution is a major source of air pollution, but this research I'm aware of is focused solely on automobile travel to and from sporting events. And it doesn't really focus on understanding the contribution of that to overall air quality or comparing it to an industrial pollution, which of course I think we would all agree is a serious problem. So, but if you know how many cars are driving to and from stadiums or arenas, and you know what objective measures of air quality are in those cities, that can be interpreted as a causal relationship. So that's the research that I was referring to. Now let's see. There's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot of questions. Is there another part of that question that you'd like me to address?
Let me continue the questions. 그러니까 이제 소셜 베네핏 차원에서
social benefit.
스포츠의
Right.
소셜
Right.
베네핏
Right. I
차원에서
recall.
예를 들면
Social benefits.
한국에서 과거 10년 동안 라이프 익스펙턴시가 1.9년 늘어났습니다. 그런데 그 1.9년 중에 1.7년이 유병 기간이에요. 치료받는 기간입니다. 그러니까 생명은 늘어났는데 그 늘어나는 대부분의 기간이 병원에서 치료받는 기간이에요. 그럼 뭐냐면 스포츠가 이 소셜 코스트, 헬스 코스트를 줄여줄 수 있는 굉장히 중요한 옵션이 될 수 있는 거죠. 그러니까 스포츠를 통해서 예를 들어서 앞선에서 말씀하셨던 네거티브 이펙트를 고려를 했으면 아마 베네핏, 파지티브 이펙트를 고려를 해서 전체 토털리 이렇게 고려를 했을 때 스포츠가 과연 지역과 경제에 미치는 영향을 판단해야 되는 게 아닌가라는 생각입니다.
Yes, of course. I certainly agree that getting people, residents, to participate in sport and become more active can play an extremely important role in health improvement. And I've done research on that, and I've published a paper with Jane that shows that increased participation in sport causes increases in health. So that's, but in terms of the overall social benefit, well, I did point out that I agree completely with the idea that professional sporting events can lead to a sense of community well-being and draw people together and create world-class city status. The point of my talk, though, was to focus on the subsidies that we provide in the United States, which I think is a poor local economic development policy. And my intent was to point out in an international audience that we have not had, in the United States, have not had a good economic policy in terms of local economic development. And I think one of my points on my slide was to urge people in Korea to learn from our mistakes in order to make better local economic development policies. You know, I don't dispute that there are social benefits that are beyond just jobs created and that are beyond just increases in wages. But in the U.S., nothing would happen like is happening in Nagasaki, where a professional, a business would build stadiums and develop the area around those stadiums. That would be done with government money. And so that's my larger point was, don't make the mistakes that the U.S. has made and make smarter choices in terms of how you're going to use sport to promote local economic development.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are there more questions from the floor? Yep. Right over here.
네, 문에 있고 하라다 씨한테 여쭙겠습니다. 한국에서는 그 공무원들이 순환식 보직, 그러니까 몇 년 이 부서에서 일하고 다음에 저 부서로 이동하고 하다 보니까 전문성이 떨어지는 경우가 많습니다. 그래서 그런지 요즘 한국에서도 특히 지방 정부에서는 이 스포츠 이벤트를 유치하거나 개최하는 전문 인력, 그 스포츠 커미션 같은 게 필요하다는 의견들이 지금 한국에서 많이 제기가 되고 있는데요. 근데 부끄럽게도 한국 공무원들은 그 민간 인력들하고 같이 협업하는 걸 상당히 꺼려합니다. 이거 어떻게 설득해야 될까요?
Well, thank you for your question. In Japan, exactly same thing happening in our society. Every 2 years, public officers just move around. So we teach them what sport tourism, what sports commission. After 2 years, they go on. So we have to repeatedly provide education curriculum to them. But once those kind of things are privatized, there is a lot of specialists, a lot of young people who got a job in the sports business, studying marketing, management, and even sports technology type thing. So they help the government officer to create some kind of a PPP, public and private relationship. Those kind of things are just happening. Not everywhere, but case by case. So PPP is one of the very important cooperation get-together system, I think. But if you talk about the government office, yes, same thing. 2 years, 3 years, they just rotate. And so can't accumulate the knowledge and experience in municipal government. Yes, that's kind of problem. Thank you.
We also deal with that. Just to be clear, it is not just a problem over here. So we have the same problem. Our government officials are not expertise in our field. And I gave that example today of us hosting the Men's World Ski the Cup in Lake Louise. That's a private business. Lake Louise owns a bunch of ski resorts all over the world. And with them, we had to work together to lobby the provincial government to say, so this is a new minister of sport who had just come in. We had just had our election. It was the new minister of sport. And we literally had 2 weeks to lobby to say, hey, we need $1 million to get a $22 million return on investment here. And so we were unsuccessful in that endeavor through even that joint partnership. The nice part is I think the local government piece is always so important because you don't have that same turnover. So on the municipal level, we typically have councillors and mayors in our community that are there longer. We have local expertise that is there, and we have that private business that is also there. So I think really leaning on those folks to help, inform or lobby those more senior officials is so important. So you need to have these commissions as an example, or you need to have those proper stakeholders to get the right people at the table to say, you really need to understand this is important, otherwise we're going to miss out on a great economic opportunity. So I think it happens everywhere, and you just have to find the right strategies.
Can I ask some question? One more?
Yes,
Okay.
please go ahead.
미스 아만다 아바컬. 여기 우리나라에서는 한국에서는 대회가 열리면은 그 지역에 있는 상인들이 물가를 많이 올려요. 가격을 많이 올려서 이게 문제가 많이 되고 있는데 지금 있는 반프라는 지역에서는 그 상인들이 이때다 돈을 좀 벌어야 된다 그래서 뭐 숙박료를 올리거나 음식값을 올리거나 이러지 않나요? 그걸 어떻게 컨트롤하시나요?
They do, by lots. So in our non-peak season, our average hotel rate is probably about $400 US a night. When we have a major sporting event or at our peak times of year, it can be over $1,000 per night for a hotel stay. I think the reality for us is that we are a world-class tourism destination. I assume some people in this room know where Banff, Canada is, which always blows my mind. It's a town of 8,000 people, so it's just crazy. And so I think we always have people coming in, and that's reality. But do the private sector capitalize on that? They do. But that's actually kind of interesting because on the regional sport tourism side, that's been a huge impact to us. In 2010, when we did that facility upgrade for our winter sport facility, we added a second arena. And the commitment from the mayor at the time was that there'll be no additional cost to taxpayers through the addition of this arena because we'll generate regional sport tourism events, so hockey tournaments and things like that will make it not cost us anything, and we'll get heads and beds in the hotel rooms. Well, turns out mom and dad of a hockey kid in Alberta or anywhere in Canada can't afford a $1,000 a night hotel stay in Banff, Alberta. So we really had to get creative and to really deal with that. We grew our minor hockey associations, we grew our local skate clubs, we partnered with those groups and did a lot of free learn to programs and had a lot new players enter the program. So we really doubled our minor hockey association. Our neighboring community got a junior A hockey team, and that's really grown it because we couldn't afford to bring in those outside tournaments. In the summertime, we don't put ice in anymore. We actually take our hockey rinks and they turn into convention halls, and they're, oddly enough, used for dance competitions, so national and international dance competitions, and that's what we have to use them for because the hockey parents can't afford to stay in our community. So really interesting model we had to shift to.
If I could add, you're 100% right that when you have sporting events, or I'd say any event where large gatherings, the private sector businesses around, they will take advantage. And I think it's difficult to stop that, but I will tell you it's interesting. We're seeing more and more certain events, part of their decision criteria of where to take their event is based on cost, particularly housing. And it depends on the event. You know, you have some events cost doesn't matter as much, but many, particularly youth events, they will choose, all being equal, they will choose a lower cost city over other ones because they can market that to their potential participants to bring more people in. It still doesn't stop once people are there for parking or other things to increase rates, but I will say that cost more and more is becoming a factor of events rights holders choosing where to bring events.
I would add to it. It all comes down to supply and demand at some point, because more events you host and there's more demand, they will build more hotels or more accommodations, more restaurants that will become competitive, where now they'll have to bring down the cost to certain points because there's more supply. And we've seen this in Indiana, where, especially Indianapolis, as we gain more events, host more visitors in town, we're now building more hotels. What that means is the existing hotel is not going to be able to charge as much as they did in the past because there's going to be more supply of rooms that's going to be coming out into the market. So I think it's also just cycle of, you know, how do you manage, and there will be some time where there's a period of overage, but at a certain point, if you're able to host more, then you'll be able to create more opportunities for other businesses to kind of increase that supply and ultimately balance the demand.
Okay, more questions.
네, 안녕하세요. 저는 스포츠과학원 김민수라고 합니다. 저는 세 가지 질문이 있는데 세 분한테 질문을 하겠습니다. 네, 첫 번째는 데이비드 길버트한테 물어보겠습니다. 클리블랜드 스포츠 커미션이 올해 20개의 스포츠 이벤트를 유치를 했다고 발표 때 말씀을 하셨습니다. 그러면 일반적으로는 메가 스포츠 이벤트가 더 경제적인 효과가 더 크겠지만 올해 그 호스트했던 그 20개 이벤트 중에서 가장 이제 성공적인 이벤트가 뭐였고, 혹시 실패해서 아까 그 경제적인 효과가 조금 낮았거나 실패한 경우 어떤 경우가 있었는지, 그거는 이제 그럼 실패 요인이 뭐였는지 그 부분에 대해서 먼저 묻고 싶고요. 네, 일단 이거부터 먼저 하겠습니다.
Thank you. We had several extremely large events this year. The largest one, impact-wise, was actually one called WWE SummerSlam. It's a large national wrestling event. It's sort of scripted. It's made for television wrestling. It was in our football stadium. 55,000 people were there. 80, actually over 90% were from outside of the market, and they stayed for. There was another event, so that was the biggest one. A lot of television, big production. Interestingly enough, we were awarded that event only 6 months before. Most events, like our other biggest one, the Women's Basketball Championship, we were awarded that event 6 years before. So the biggest economic value comes from how many, largely when we're measuring it, how many people come into town, how long they stay, of events where the hotels are going for 2, 3, or 4 times their normal amount because of supply and demand. Those also add significant economic value. We did have an interesting event that was still great for us. I mentioned this Pan Am Masters Games. We were expecting probably about 6,000 athletes from around the world, and we ended up with about 4. From everything we know, the primary reason was a lot of the wars going on in the world. That event tends to get a lot of people from Russia, Ukraine, and also from Israel. And we probably would have had at least 1,000 athletes from those 3 countries alone, but we had almost 0 due to things completely outside of our control. So there are times when, COVID's a great example. Probably all of us had events that were scheduled during COVID that got canceled. It devastated the global visitor economy. So there are times when outside forces, but also we're a nonprofit organization. We still have to run like a business. We still need to make decisions. We are willing to take risk. Our organization is willing to take risk, but we have to take measured risk. And certain things like a pandemic, you really can't predict. But we build into our economic models a lot of what-if scenarios. What if attendance is 80% of what it's been in past cities for whatever reason? So we do have to look at that almost. Really in every event where our organization takes on financial risk.
네, 두 번째 질문은 찰리신 부사장님께 하겠습니다. 아까 이제 그 스포츠 테크 에코시스템에 대해서 설명을 해주셨는데 한국에서 그런 시스템을 그 생태계를 만들려면 그 스포츠 테크 헤드쿼터 같은 데가 이제 한국에는 지금 없는데 어떻게 해야 그런 생태계를 만들 수 있을지, 한국에 그 시스템을 가져오려면 어떻게 시작을 해야 될지 한번 여쭤보겠습니다.
So I think we could look at the cluster of innovation that we've shared and the role that each of those elements play. We talked about having importance of to be successful in the cluster innovation, you need to have a funding, access to financing. And then you need to have access to corporations, networks. Then you need to have access to municipality and the ability to work with them, as well as a skilled work resource. So when we look at all these individual pieces, you have to find a place where that can be delivered in a city. So for us, we had one of the top private equity companies in the U.S. So there's a lot of private financing companies that are based in Indiana that are looking for companies to invest in. So it's easy for that company to come here because now they are able to meet with them directly. We have programs like Techstars, where it's a global accelerator program. We worked with them to build a program just for Indianapolis. The founding partners were Colt. We had Pacers as part of that, and focus on not just the overall technology, but we emphasized it on the sports technology for that. So we're able to provide access to corporations in sports. And we look at Indiana, it's not just two professional sports teams, but we have NCAA, which is the headquarter for the college sports. We have Indy 500, which is one of the largest racing track and racing events that takes place. We have 4 or 5 different minor leagues, which one of them is where the Korean baseball player Bae-Ji-won used to play when he went down to the minor league. So there's a lot of corporations in sports industry that can be a test bed and provide pilot opportunities for many of these companies. And then we talked about the municipality Indy Sports Corp organizations. We talked about the HQ, Tech HQ. These were built to provide resources and guidelines for specifically to these type of companies. So the government have invested in creating this resource and a network that's going to help them and find their way into the city. And then the last piece is the skilled worker resource. We have a great school system in our state. We have Notre Dame, we have Purdue, Indiana University. These are state colleges that provides a excellent students that are now companies are having access to directly because nowadays in US it's really hard to find talent from schools, especially with certain skill sets. Purdue is one of the highest well-known science college in the state. That's one of the reasons why the Hyundai Hynix have partnered with them to develop a chip manufacturing site in Indiana was because they'll have that direct access to their research centers working with them. So having all of these elements will play into the mix. And it's gonna take time. I don't think this is something that you could just create overnight, but they were very intentional thinking about what are some of the areas within the sports that they want to focus on that's going to help drive the economics within the state, and they found that sports technology was one of the areas that they wanted to invest in, and then they started to put resources, they started to put long-term plans in place, and then work with sports professional teams like us to bring us into the fold and be part of that process.
네, 감사합니다. 마지막 질문은 저기 연사는 아니셨지만 모더레이터인 닥터 루세스키에게 하겠습니다. 키노트 스피치에서 이제 험프리스 교수님이 좀 그 스포츠 이벤트를 호스팅하는 거에 좀 네거티브하게 이제 경제적인 효과를 좀 네거티브하게 말씀을 하셨는데 같은 경제학자로서 어떻게 보시는지, 똑같은 입장인지 아니면 다르게 보시는지 여쭙고 싶습니다.
Well, first of all, I don't think that the word negative economic impact was what came out of Professor Humphrey's mouth. I do agree that it is not very good policy and for very extremely wealthy professional sports teams to extract taxpayers' money to build them new palace stadiums for their very wealthy players. So I do share the same views with him from that perspective. And we can look around this room, and we've seen examples of, and even in the US, where some professional sports teams do build their own stadiums. They have the means to do so. They're very wealthy. There's no reason why billionaires should be getting taxpayers' monies from people who are struggling to make a living in the country to finance their stadiums. So that is the largest point I think I would like you to take away from this. It's not that, the position is not that professional sports teams or hosting sporting events is is a negative drag on the economy. The point is that you have to look hard to see where the economic benefits are. You have to remember that it is displaced spending from somewhere else. But most importantly, we can achieve these goals and have the civic pride and have the grassroots participation and encourage sport participation via other development policies that it's not about billionaire owners extracting rents from average taxpayers to build their stadiums for millionaire players.
Now, as a person who works for one of those billionaires, I think it's a case by case, especially when you look at the history of Indianapolis. This city did not have any professional sports teams, and they built a stadium, NFL stadium, without having an NFL team, in the hope that they would get an NFL team, which they did, and that completely changed the landscape of the state. They use this phrase a lot. They say, Indianapolis Colts put Indianapolis on the map. Because prior to that, not many people knew where Indianapolis was. So it does have an impact in situations where nowadays it's impossible to get an NFL team in your city. Even if you are able to build new stadiums, it's just not possible just based on the structure. But back then, it made sense for the cities to make that investment and bet on that they were going to host and get an NFL team that could potentially have a tremendous impact on their city, and it paid off. So I think it will be kind of case by case depending on the
Now, Charlie, as a longtime resident of Baltimore, Maryland, I have to point out that where exactly did that NFL team that moved to Indianapolis come from?
Yes. So we moved from Baltimore because they weren't planning to renovate the stadium for the team. So again, on those incidents, it was completely opposite story, but Indianapolis, for them, investment in this new stadium made sense and actually paid off for them.
So but Baltimore was a big loser there, right? So the citizens of Baltimore lost their beloved Colts to Indianapolis. So, you know, cuts both ways.
그 길버트 클리브랜드 CEO께 좀 스포츠 커머스 CEO한테 한번 여쭤보고 싶은 게 있는데요. 딴 게 아니라 그 운영 예산의 60%를 그 기업이나 이런 그 프라이빗 섹터에서 이제 가져오신다고 제가 이제 이게 이해를 했는데 그 기업들이 이 스포츠 커미션의 운영비를 지원할 때는 분명히 반대로 그 기업은 이익을 원하기 때문에 뭔가 클리블랜드 스포츠 커미션으로부터 원하는 무슨 대가가 있을 것 같은데 그걸 어떻게 설득을 해가지고 후원을 받으셨는지 그게 조금 궁금합니다.
It's a great question. You would think your premise is right that they want something. What we find is they provide support because they believe we are providing a very significant return on that investment back into growing our community. So there's, if any company, they, in most cases, to some level, they will have dollars that they set aside to invest in some way, shape, or form into their community to make it better. We find that our organization gets especially for the size of our organization, which is not all that big, we get a very outsized amount of corporate contributions because we do show a very specific return on investment. We know the number of events that we bring into town. We know the dollars that it attracts. The companies do like the large events. They like events that bring notoriety to the city. We hear that they do it because what we do also provides civic pride for their employees. But it really is a choice of whether they might provide funding to us or the art museum or a social service organization or others. What we try to show them is that that they get a very strong return on investment back into the community by investing in us.
Do we have more questions?
네, 하라다 교수님께 여쭤보고 싶습니다. 이제 스포츠 커미션이 한국 상황에서는 인구 감소와 지역 소멸을 해결할 수 있는 굉장히 중요한 대안이 될 수 있다고 생각을 합니다. 일본도 마찬가지의 경험을 겪으셨는데요. 근데 이게 도입되려면 굉장히 기존에 있는 이해관계 구조가 굉장히 탄탄하게 형성이 되어 있습니다. 예를 들면 지역이 갖고 있는 공공 스포츠 시설은 지역의 시설관리공단이라는 공공기업이 들어가서 운영을 하고 있습니다. 시설 관리를 하고 있고 그 운영은 지역에 있는 종목별 체육회가 거의 위탁을 운영을 하고 있습니다. 근데 스포츠 커미션에서 이거를 대회를 하려면 이 지역 시설을 써야 되고 그 다음에 지역 종목별 협회의 협조나 협력이 없으면 불가능한 상태입니다. 그런데 이제 커미션에서 스포츠 이벤트를 하려면 이게 뭔가 이렇게 상대의 자합을 이렇게 서로 먹어버리는 밥그릇 싸움이 되는 통역을 어떻게 하실까요? 네, 그렇게 굉장히 첨예하게 이해관계가 대립이 되기 때문에 이게 실제로 현재 한국의 예를 들어서 태백이라는 곳에서 이 문제가 발생을 하고 있습니다. 그래서 아마도 공무원 문제보다 이게 더 심각한 문제 해결해야 될 과제가 아닌가라고 생각을 하는데 일본에서 이런 문제들을 어떻게 조율하고 오거나이즈하고 문제를 해결하셨는지 한번 여쭤보고 싶습니다.
As I told you before, the public and private relationship is well developed in my country, and some public facility was run by the private company, and that system we call the designated administration. The rights of operating that facility was given to a private sector, and of course they can create money, and some part of the profit has to bring back to the public sector, so they can create money by using the private sector. So it's really you need the innovation of the system to create that kind of things. Yeah, is answering your question?
If I could add, we deal with this very regularly. I would imagine you as well, because many of these facilities that we utilize for the events are publicly owned, and there are many times where we pay rent. We can build it into the budget of the event, and we pay rent to our city or our county, depending who owns the facility. So the facility can make back some of their operating revenue. There are times when the economics don't work, and we may ask our city or county for a particular event, would they donate? And we might show on the back end they're going to generate revenue because they might bring in dollars from hotel taxes or sales taxes or other taxes they generate that would be more than the rent that's paid. But I think it is oftentimes almost a case-by-case basis, but the main point is we don't always ask for those public facilities to be used for free in order to attract an event. We try every time we can to actually pay or have the event rights holder pay money to rent that facility.
Can I add a few things to that? So that is very true. Within Canada as well, we've had this model since we had a big boom of recreation facilities and sport event facilities that were built in the early and late 90s. And they were all very specific to specific sports. And what was great, and so because of that, a lot of them were originally run by the municipal government or the regional government. But then the sports organization that were using the facilities would be like, you guys aren't running this well, it's not great. And we slowly had this takeover by these nonprofit sport organizations or these for-profit sport organizations of these publicly built facilities. And when the early 2000s happened and the mid 2000s and we started needing these facilities to be renovated, these sport organizations don't have that capital. And so we thought, well, how do we, regardless, it's still people playing sport, it's still about well-being, it's still great for your community, how do we deal with this? So we did take them all back, but we took them back strategically. We took them along with us. So I mentioned already, we have a tiered pricing structure. So those local sport organizations are not paying the same to now use this publicly run facility to do the same thing they were always doing. So their operating costs are maintained. The other thing we have done is we've made our facilities multi-purpose. We do not build anything anymore that can only be used for one thing, and especially if it's not a consistent weekly thing. We do not invest in that in Canada at all anymore. It has to be multi-purpose, and it has to be able to be used by all. And we really find that the public gets behind these builds a lot more because each person sees the value added to their family or to their community individually. So those are big shifts. We've really taken back a lot of those, exactly what had happened with you, it sounds like. We've taken them back, but we've really worked with the organization to really honestly pitch them on the benefits of why they want us to do that with them, and it's really worked. When it comes to providing space for free and public space for free, we do that a lot when they can tell us, here's the economic benefit to your community for us to come in and do this thing. And as administration, which I am, we stay out of that discussion. We allow council and we allow our senior officials. Our former mayor is now the senator in Canada for sport and tourism. So she plays a really active role for us in all those types of decision making, and we lean on them to make that decision because we as administration don't want to be the one that comes back to. But we really work with them to help them make the right decision when we think there's a good benefit to locals. Where we provide discounts now on the local level, or where we provide that space for free, is when they can tell us how they're going to support local sports. So we will allow NHL teams to come in and they can use their ice for free. If they have an open ice practice with a bunch of our local kids who now get to play with NHL level players. Or if they provide a certain amount of training hours, or if they provide equipment. So in that exchange for service, we're always willing to provide space. The Banff Marathon, as another example, provides a resident rate, so a Banff rate, for people to participate in the marathon. So we pay about half the cost and entry fees to participate in that. So there's a lot of ways you can work with those organizations to have those events happen, I think, or to have that sport come back.
One of the things that I found it interesting is that while they are a public organization, they operate as if they're a commercial company. Their number one goal for the general manager of the facility is to maximize the event days in their facility. His number one goal is to get as many events as possible. Keeping the lights on 365 days is his goal. And they actually have people dedicated just for securing events. So the person will reach out and work with others to get concerts, whatever events that they could host, so that they could maintain that facility and have operated as many days as possible. So although it is public company, they're operating because they know that they need to maximize it in order to make it worthwhile for the investment that they put in. And that's also aligning with the city, because more events means more people coming to town. That means more economic growth within the community for other types of businesses that surrounds that facility.
Okay, we have about a few minutes left here, so I think we can have time for maybe one more question. I don't know if the organizers wanted to make any closing remarks. If there's no more time for questions, just let me know, and we can take it. Okay, one more question, going once, going twice, going 3 times. Okay, that means we're done. Thank you, everybody. It was a great discussion.